The first side to win a modern war may not be the side that fires first. It may be the side that understands first. Before a missile leaves a rail, before a bomber crosses a border, before a ship turns into the threat, someone has to notice something small and decide that it matters. A strange heat bloom, a radar flicker, a burst of radio traffic, a truck that was parked 1 mile east yesterday and is now parked 1 mile west. That is where this story begins, because the United States military does not try to see the battlefield as a collection of separate eyes. It tries to build one giant nervous system, a living mesh of sensors, analysts, software, links, and commanders that can feel a change, interpret it, and pass it to the right hands before the enemy can exploit the gap. This is Battletech Declassified. Modern warfare explained. If you imagine war as a dark ocean at night, ISR is not one lighthouse on the shore. It is a whole coastline lighting up at once. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, usually shortened to ISR, is often talked about like 3 separate tools. In practice, the modern U.S. approach treats them as one connected process that helps the force sense, make sense, and act faster than the other side. Official U.S. doctrine and current modernization language keep circling back to the same point. Advantage comes from linking sensors, data, processing, and command systems into a resilient network that creates decision advantage, not from trusting a single exquisite platform to do everything alone. So, let's strip the jargon away and talk like normal human beings. Intelligence is the answer sheet. It is the judgment, the meaning, the conclusion. Surveillance is the patient stare. It is the continuous watching of an area, route, target, or pattern over time. Reconnaissance is the risky peek forward, the deliberate search to find out what is really there. If surveillance is watching a suspicious house from across the street for hours, reconnaissance is walking around the block to see who keeps entering through the side door. And intelligence is the moment you realize the house is not just suspicious. It is the logistics hub for the whole neighborhood network. The mistake people make is assuming these happen one after the other in clean little boxes. In real operations, they overlap constantly. A satellite may spot activity. A drone may linger to track it. Signals intelligence may reveal who is talking. Software may compare the pattern to months of prior behavior. And an analyst may fuse that into an assessment that matters to a pilot, a ship captain, a corps commander, or a policymaker. That is why the U.S. military increasingly talks less like it is collecting random pictures and more like it is building an information machine that converts observation into action. Think of it like the human body. Your eyes do not win a boxing match by themselves. Your ears do not. Your skin does not. Your brain does not. Victory comes from the connection between sensing, interpreting, deciding, and moving. Touch the hot stove, feel pain, understand danger, move your hand. Now scale that up to continents, oceans, orbit, cyberspace, and the electromagnetic spectrum. That is the military challenge. The battlefield is too big, too fast, too jammed, and too deceptive for one platform or one headquarters to carry the whole burden. That is why current U.S. modernization is full of phrases like system of systems, integrated battle network, data flows, distributed nodes, and resilient decision advantage. The language sounds sterile, but the idea is simple. Instead of betting everything on a few giant flying command posts or a small club of elite sensors, the force wants a web, many eyes, many ears, many paths for information. Many points from which a commander can still understand the fight even if an adversary tries to blind, jam, isolate, or destroy part of the network. Start with the first word, intelligence. This is not just secret spies in dark suits or Hollywood folders stamped top secret. In military terms, intelligence is processed understanding. It is what turns raw data into something useful. A radar return is not intelligence yet. A thermal image is not intelligence yet. A burst of intercepted chatter is not intelligence yet. Those are ingredients. Intelligence is the cooked meal. It is the assessment that says, this unit is preparing to move at dawn. This site is a decoy. This ship has changed posture from training to combat readiness. This air defense node is active but vulnerable. This pattern matches pre-strike behavior. That distinction matters. Because raw collection can drown a force as easily as it can help it. Modern militaries do not starve for data. They choke on it. The current push behind JADC2 and related service efforts is built around that exact problem. There is too much information moving too fast across too many domains for old command systems to digest manually. So the goal is not just to collect more. It is to sort, prioritize, fuse, and deliver meaning in time to matter. Now take surveillance. Surveillance sounds passive, but in war, it is one of the most aggressive things a force can do. To watch persistently is to deny the enemy comfort. It is to make hiding expensive. It is to force movement in shadows, pauses in communication, strange routes, false emissions, decoys, and fear. Persistent surveillance does not just reveal what the enemy is doing. It changes what the enemy feels safe doing. A ship under watch maneuvers differently. A missile unit under watch emits less. A headquarters under watch becomes paranoid. That is why surveillance is about duration as much as discovery. A single snapshot is helpful, but a pattern over time is gold. The U.S. military has long valued persistent surveillance precisely because it helps commanders act in time rather than admire a picture after the moment has passed. In plain language, one photo tells you what existed. Repeated observation tells you what is changing, and change is often where the real warning lives. Then comes reconnaissance, the forward question mark. Reconnaissance is not just staring longer, it is searching with purpose. It is the act of going out to confirm, discover, or clarify something the force does not yet know. If surveillance is a security camera on the shop wall, reconnaissance is the patrol that walks around back because the camera angle is bad and the alley smells wrong. It is the active effort to reduce uncertainty before uncertainty becomes blood. Reconnaissance matters because battlefields lie. Mountains hide launchers. Weather hides aircraft. Civilian clutter hides vehicles. Adversaries use decoys, emission control, camouflage, false traffic, underground networks, and simple silence. Reconnaissance is how commanders push beyond assumption. In a modern ISR network, that might mean queuing one sensor from another, sending a different platform to verify a suspicious signature, or tasking a unit to answer a specific intelligence requirement rather than just collect pretty footage for the archive. Put those three together, and you get the real magic. Surveillance watches. Reconnaissance probes. Intelligence explains. But the explanation does not stay in a binder. It feeds targeting, maneuver, deception, air defense, logistics, maritime posture, cyber response, and political decision-making. This is the part most people miss. ISR is not a camera department. It is not a side hobby for specialists with fancy antennas. It is the bloodstream of modern command. When commanders say they want situational awareness, what they really want is timely, trustworthy ISR that has already been translated into a decision they can use. This is why current U.S. efforts frame command and sensing as inseparable. The official JADC2 language is blunt about it. The joint force must be able to sense, make sense, and act across the battle space quickly, using automation, AI, predictive analytics, and resilient networks. In other words, ISR is not the prelude to command. It is woven into command itself. To understand how this works in practice, picture a long chain. At one end, a sensor detects something. At the other end, a commander or shooter does something. Between those 2 points lies the part everyone underestimates: data transport, processing, correlation, validation, classification, human review, prioritization, dissemination. If any link is slow, broken, jammed, overloaded, or mistrusted, the whole chain turns into theater. The sensor saw something, but no one usable learned anything in time. That is why modern ISR networks are built less like museum pieces and more like delivery systems. The question is never just, can you detect? The real question is, can you move that observation through the network, fuse it with other inputs, protect it from interference, and put it in front of the right decision maker fast enough to change the outcome? That is the heart of integrated ISR. Not seeing for the sake of seeing, but seeing for the sake of acting. Now we can talk about the battlefield as layers. The U.S. military does not rely on one altitude, one service, or one domain. It uses space, high altitude, airborne, maritime, ground, cyber, and electromagnetic sources together because each has strengths and weaknesses. Satellites cover wide areas and see far, but they are not always persistent over one spot. Drones can linger, but they can be jammed or shot at. Aircraft can carry powerful sensors, but they are expensive and vulnerable. Ground sensors can be close and continuous, but their field of view is narrow. Signals collection can reveal intent, but only if the target emits. The network matters because one layer compensates for another. A space sensor may detect something unusual. A high-altitude platform may refine the picture. A drone may track movement. Ground signals may confirm the unit identity. A human analyst may compare it to historical patterns. Then the result moves to a command post, an air operations center, a ship, or a fires network. The force does not need one perfect sensor. It needs the layers to cooperate. This is where people usually imagine a giant glowing operations room, and to be fair, those do exist. But the future U.S. military seems less interested in one cathedral of screens and more interested in a distributed nervous system. Why? Because a single node, however elegant, becomes a single point of failure. If the enemy can jam it, hack it, isolate it, or kill it, the force loses coherence at the worst possible moment. That is why distributed battle management keeps showing up in current Air Force language. The Air Force's evolving DAF Battle Network and ABMS work are explicit on this point. They describe a system of systems that ties together command, control, and battle management capabilities through digital infrastructure, software, applications, and distributed nodes. One recent official explanation even contrasts this distributed approach with predecessor platforms like the E-8 J-Stars, where much of the battle management function lived on one aircraft. The shift is philosophical as much as technical. Spread the brain out so it is harder to kill. That sounds abstract until you imagine the alternative. In older concepts, a lot of awareness and coordination could live inside a few giant airborne headquarters, a few key satellites, a few central databases, a few secure links, a few command posts. That model works beautifully, right up until the enemy decides those few things are the first things to break. Then, the force discovers it had vision, but not resilience. It had awareness, but not survivability. It had a brain, but not a backup brain. Distributed ISR networks try to solve that by making information more portable, processing more flexible, and battle management less dependent on one body or one location. It is the military version of not keeping all your family photos on one phone. If the phone falls in the ocean, your memories do not have to drown with it. In war, the price of that mistake is not nostalgia. It is tempo, surprise, and lives. The Army has its own version of this story. You can see it in the language around C5ISR, deep sensing, HADES, and Titan. The Army's C5ISR Center describes its role in making sure U.S. forces can see, sense, communicate, and move faster than adversaries. That sounds almost childishly simple, but it is actually the whole game. The Army knows that on a future battlefield, especially in large-scale and multi-domain operations, it cannot wait for information to trickle downward from faraway institutions that are too slow or too disconnected from the tactical problem. So the Army is investing in systems that connect layers and shorten the path from detection to use. HADES is meant to provide higher altitude, longer endurance aerial ISR with standoff against anti-access threats. Titan is being built as a next-generation ISR ground station that can process data from space, high altitude, aerial, and terrestrial layers, support targeting, improve situational awareness, and reduce the sensor-to-shooter timeline. You can hear the same melody again. More layers, more fusion, faster decisions. Let's slow down and really look at HADES, because it tells you a lot about how the Army wants to see. For years, many readers imagined Army ISR as turboprops, drones, or lower altitude systems serving nearby commanders. HADES changes the scale. It is part of a push toward deep sensing, toward seeing farther, higher, and with more standoff in contested environments. That matters because future adversaries are not waiting politely inside short-range windows. They hide farther back, under denser air defense umbrellas, with longer range fires and stronger emissions discipline. Official Army descriptions say HADES is intended to bring together capabilities like SIGINT, SAR, MTI, and other built-in systems on a more survivable platform. In normal language, that means one aircraft can sniff signals, map terrain, detect movement, and build a richer picture from safer distances, not because one aircraft should do everything forever, but because the Army wants a deeper sensing layer that plugs into the larger network rather than staring blindly at the near fight while the real danger builds over the horizon. Titan tells the second half of the story. Collecting data is not enough. Someone has to receive it, process it, fuse it, and pass it to the people who actually need it. Titan is supposed to help do that at the ground level, connecting data from multiple layers and turning it into targeting and situational understanding. If HADES is one of the longer-range eyes, Titan is part of the brainstem that helps translate what those eyes are seeing into battlefield relevance. Army descriptions of Titan emphasize AI and machine learning for processing sensor data from space, high-altitude, aerial, and terrestrial sources. The purpose is not flashy marketing, it is throughput. Humans alone cannot manually sift every feed, compare every pattern, and still keep pace in a compressed fight. Titan exists because modern ISR is no longer about owning a feed, it is about taming the flood. Now, picture how the services overlap. The Air Force is building battle networks and distributed sea, two approaches. The Army is building deeper sensing and ground fusion nodes. The broader Joint Force is pursuing JADC2, so these efforts do not become isolated little kingdoms that speak different machine dialects and pass notes like medieval nobles. The entire point is that data from one part of the force should help another part of the force quickly enough to matter. That is why interoperability sounds boring until you imagine the alternative. A Navy sensor sees the threat. An Air Force node can classify it. An Army unit could hit it. But the formats do not match. The permissions are wrong. The routing is slow, and the window closes. The target survives, not because it was invisible, but because the network behaved like three separate companies on a bad group project. Integrated ISR exists to prevent exactly that humiliation. At this point, it helps to think of ISR as a choreography problem. Every sensor has a personality. Some are wide, but shallow. Some are narrow, but precise. Some live long, but see little. Some see briefly, but see sharply. Some are passive and safe. Some must emit and expose themselves. Some gather visuals. Some gather signals. Some measure movement. Some infer intent. The art is not simply owning them. The art is cueing them, in the right order, at the right time, against the right problem. A good ISR network does not ask every sensor to do everything. It lets one sensor trigger another, like a relay race where each runner has a specific stretch. A broad sensor detects anomaly. A more focused sensor confirms. A signals collection platform identifies. A fusion node correlates. A commander prioritizes. A shooter or maneuver force responds. This is how a network sees everything, not by staring equally at every inch of the earth, but by moving attention intelligently. And that phrase, sees everything, deserves a warning label. No military sees everything. Not really. Clouds still exist. Deception still works. Terrain still hides. Civilian clutter still confuses. Communications go quiet. Signatures get spoofed. The point of an ISR network is not omniscience. The point is to reduce uncertainty faster than the enemy can weaponize it. That is a huge difference. One is godlike fantasy. The other is achievable military advantage. In fact, modern official language tends to be much more sober than online hype. It talks about resilience, integration, decision advantage, speed, and survivability, not perfect awareness. The network exists because the battlefield is messy, contested, and hostile to clean pictures. You build redundancy precisely because you know you will still be partially blind. The goal is not to become blind nowhere. It is to remain blind nowhere that matters for too long. So how does information actually move inside this kind of system? Imagine a nervous system again. Sensors are nerve endings. Data links are nerves. Processing nodes are local clusters and brain regions. Analysts are the parts of the mind that interpret complex signals. Commanders are the parts that decide what the body should do next. Shooters and maneuver units are muscles. If one link is slow, the whole body becomes clumsy. If multiple links are cut, the body thrashes. If false signals enter, the body can strike the wrong thing. That is why communications and processing are not side dishes to ISR. They are the meal. US. Modernization language often bundles command, control, communications, cyber, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance together because they are interdependent in practice. If you can collect beautifully but cannot communicate, your ISR becomes decorative. If you can communicate but cannot process, your network becomes a fire hose with no cup. This is also where AI enters the conversation, and immediately people start imagining killer robots reading every signal with perfect confidence. Reality is less cinematic and more useful. In the ISR context, AI and machine learning are often discussed as tools for sorting, correlating, flagging, prioritizing, and helping humans handle impossible volumes of data. Think less magic prophecy, more triage nurse in a packed emergency room. Which cases are urgent? Which patterns match prior warnings? Which tracks need immediate human attention? Official JADC 2 language explicitly mentions automation, AI, predictive analytics, and machine learning in the push to help the joint force sense, make sense, and act. Army descriptions of Teton likewise stress AI and ML to process multi-layer sensor data and shorten the sensor-to-shooter timeline. So the role of AI here is not to replace judgment wholesale. It is to compress chaos into something a human command chain can actually handle under time pressure. But speed has a dark side. Faster is not automatically better. A network that pushes wrong information at machine speed can create machine speed mistakes. This is one reason trust matters so much in ISR. Every observation has a confidence level. Every source has limitations. Every track may be stale, spoofed, misclassified, or incomplete. The integrated network is powerful only if it can tell users not just what it thinks, but how sure it is and why. That sounds boring until you picture a commander betting aircraft, ships, or artillery on a bad track because the interface made uncertainty look like certainty. So a mature ISR network is not just a faster pipe. It is a disciplined ecosystem of provenance, validation, fusion, and human skepticism. In teenage language, the network should not just gossip faster. It should know which friend is reliable before it blows up the whole school group chat. There is another reason integrated ISR matters. It lets the force see not just objects, but behavior. This is where warfare becomes almost psychological. One tank in a field is a tank. 10 trucks moving to unusual dispersal points at night, while certain radios go quiet, and a radar site changes pattern is not just movement, it is a story. It may suggest pre-strike preparation, deception, repositioning, or retreat. Intelligence lives in the behavior, not just the pixels. A well-built ISR network helps convert snapshots into patterns. That requires time series, historical comparison, multi-source fusion, and enough persistence to know what normal used to look like before abnormal appeared. In practical terms, the network is trying to answer the most important battlefield question of all. What has changed? And what does that change mean? This is also why ISR is inseparable from deception and counter-deception. The better your network gets at finding real patterns, the more the enemy tries to feed it fake ones. False emitters, decoy vehicles, controlled communications, inflatable systems, misleading logistics routes, deliberate signature management. The battlefield becomes a contest between seeing and being seen, but also between understanding and being misled. Recent Army discussion of deception operations points directly at this dynamic, noting that adversary ISR networks rely on rapid detection, classification, and engagement, and that manipulation of enemy perception can disrupt their targeting cycles. Flip that logic around, and you understand the US problem as well. It is not enough to gather more inputs. The network must separate real needles from fake needles in haystacks the enemy keeps reshaping. So how do you make an ISR network harder to fool? First, by using multiple phenomenologies, which is a fancy way of saying multiple types of sensing. If one sensor only sees heat, cool decoys may help. If one sensor only sees movement, stillness may help. If one sensor only hears emissions, silence may help. But if heat, motion, radar, signals, visual imagery, geospatial context, and historical behavior all overlap, deception gets harder. Not impossible, just harder. Second, you make the network question itself. Cross-queuing, fusion, confidence scoring, and human analytic review exist because a single source can seduce a commander into false certainty. The integrated system should behave like a suspicious detective, not an overeager fan. It should ask, what else supports this? What contradicts it? What changed? And what would the enemy want us to believe right now? Now let's talk about time. Time is everything in ISR. Information has a shelf life. A picture from 6 hours ago may be useless if the launcher moved in 6 minutes. A signal geolocated perfectly, but delivered too late, is not a victory. A command post identified after it already displaced is intelligence in the same way yesterday's weather is a forecast. This is why modern U.S. efforts obsess over timelines and decision speed. Army material on Titan is explicit that the goal is to reduce the sensor-to-shooter timeline. Air Force descriptions of the DAF Battle Network likewise emphasize faster, better, more accurate decisions and resilient decision advantage. Put bluntly, the network is trying to outrun mobility. It wants to convert fleeting observations into timely choices before targets disappear, disperse, harden, or strike first. This is where old mental models fail. Many people still imagine ISR as a pre-war or early war function, a kind of scouting phase before the real action begins. Modern networks blur that distinction. ISR is continuous before, during, and after engagement. It finds targets, updates tracks, monitors effects, reveals enemy adaptation, detects follow-on threats, and helps commanders decide whether to re-attack, relocate, deceive, protect, or exploit. The seeing does not stop when the shooting starts. It gets more urgent. In fact, official descriptions of battle networks and deep sensing point toward exactly this continuity. Sensors, processing nodes, and battle managers are being tied more directly to operational and targeting functions so that awareness and action remain linked through the whole fight. The network is supposed to live with the battle, not merely introduce it. You can also think of ISR as insurance against surprise. Surprise in war rarely appears as total invisibility. More often, it appears as missed meaning. The clues were there, but they were scattered, delayed, buried, or dismissed. One feed noticed a change. Another feed noticed a different change. Nobody fused them in time. Nobody realized the pieces belong to the same puzzle. That is, the nightmare integrated ISR is designed to reduce. This is why data fusion is such a big deal. It is not glamorous. Nobody makes movie trailers about metadata standards. But when space, air, ground, cyber, and signals inputs can be correlated into one operational picture, surprise gets more expensive for the adversary. Not impossible, expensive. And in high-end warfare, forcing the enemy to spend more time, risk, and deception effort just to create the same surprise can itself be a strategic win. There is another quiet revolution inside all of this, and it is architectural. The best ISR network is not the one with the prettiest brochure. It is the one that can absorb new sensors, new software, new algorithms, and new pathways without collapsing into technical tribalism. That is why official Air Force language around the DAF Battle Network stresses architecture that allows rapid integration of new technologies, software, algorithms, and data flows at low switching costs. That phrase, low switching costs, sounds like something from a business conference, but it matters in war. Technology changes too quickly to rebuild the whole house every time you buy a better window. The network has to be modular enough that new capabilities can plug in, old ones can age out, and the whole system does not seize up every time industry improves a sensor or an adversary changes tactics. This also explains why the military increasingly values networks over individual celebrity platforms. During earlier eras, it was tempting to idolize the single aircraft, single satellite, single ship, or single sensor that seemed to define superiority. Today, that logic feels more dangerous. A brilliant, isolated platform may still be valuable, But if it cannot share, fuse, receive, and survive inside a broader architecture, it becomes like the smartest kid in class with no group project skills. Impressive, but not enough. The network approach asks a harsher question. Not just, how powerful is this platform, but how much decision advantage does it create when connected to everything else? A modest sensor inside a good network can be more operationally valuable than a superb sensor trapped in a bad one. That is the uncomfortable, modern truth. Connectivity has become combat power. Now imagine the enemy attacking the network directly, jamming links, spoofing tracks, saturating databases, striking data centers, knocking out gateways, forcing units into silence, contesting orbit, damaging aircraft. This is why resilience is not just a feel-good word. A fragile ISR network may look magnificent in peacetime demos and still fail catastrophically when the electromagnetic environment gets ugly. The force needs graceful degradation, not total collapse. In practical terms, that means alternative pathways, distributed nodes, harder-to-kill architectures, and the ability to keep operating in denied, degraded, intermittent, and limited conditions. Army sensing programs increasingly describe operation in contested and DDIL environments, and Air Force Battle Network language repeatedly stresses resilient decision advantage. The network must still function when the enemy starts hitting back, because that is when it matters most. This is one reason human operators remain central. When the network degrades, someone has to improvise. Someone has to decide which feeds matter most, which paths are still trusted, which assumptions no longer hold, and what minimum picture is good enough to act on. Technology compresses time, but humans still carry responsibility when the clean digital picture turns into a smudged windshield in a storm. So the best way to think about ISR is not machine versus human. It is machine plus human under pressure. Automation can surface patterns. AI can help sort data. Networks can route information. But commanders, analysts, and battle managers still own the consequences of belief. They are the ones who must ask the hardest question in war. Do we understand enough, right now, to act? There is also a strategic angle to all of this. ISR networks do not just support battles, they shape deterrence. If an adversary believes you can detect preparation, trace movement, fuse emissions, identify vulnerability, and pass that understanding quickly to the right command and strike elements, the adversary has to assume its options are less private and its windows are shorter. In simple terms, being seen changes behavior. That does not mean ISR alone prevents war, but it raises the price of surprise and lowers the comfort of concealment. A force that can see, sense, communicate, and move faster than its opponent strengthens both wartime effectiveness and peacetime deterrence. The strategic value of the network begins long before the first shot, because uncertainty works both ways. You want the enemy uncertain about what it can safely hide. Now let's bring this back to the title, How the U.S. Military Sees Everything. The honest answer is that it does not see everything equally, all the time, from one place. What it does try to do is build a layered, connected, resilient architecture in which many sensing and processing elements contribute to a shared operational understanding. Some look wide, some look deep, some listen, some compare, some fuse, some route, some decide. Together they create something far more powerful than any single eye. That is the difference between a sensor inventory and an ISR network. An inventory is a shopping list. A network is a living system. One is ownership, the other is orchestration. The U.S. military's current modernization language across joint, Air Force, and Army efforts clearly leans toward orchestration. The value lies in integration. It also means the future of ISR is as much about plumbing as platforms, data standards, cloud or edge processing, cross-domain sharing, interfaces, governance, security, workflow. All the invisible, boring stuff that decides whether a detection becomes an operational advantage or dies as a lonely file in the wrong system. People who ignore this part are like tourists admiring a skyscraper while forgetting the plumbing is why anyone can live there. That is why current official descriptions talk so much about digital infrastructure, software applications, data flows, and architecture. The platforms still matter, absolutely. But the connective tissue is what turns isolated capability into a coherent force. Without that connective tissue, even excellent ISR becomes expensive noise. So, when a commander asks for the picture, what they are really asking for is a miracle of organization. They want multiple domains, multiple services, multiple sensors, multiple databases, multiple time windows, and multiple levels of confidence collapsed into something simple enough to act on under stress. They want the map, the warning, the target, the risk, the confidence, and the recommendation. They want complexity translated into clarity before the enemy can exploit delay. That translation is the real work of ISR networks, not just finding facts, but converting the world's chaos into decisions. The force that does that faster tends to shape the fight. The force that does it slower tends to react to a fight someone else already shaped. And this is why ISR has become inseparable from the idea of decision advantage. Decision advantage sounds vague until you state it brutally. It means making better choices, faster, with more confidence, while the enemy is still confused, misled, late, or blind. It is not just a speed contest. It is a contest of understanding. Fast stupidity is still stupidity. But fast, well-grounded comprehension can collapse an opponent's options before the opponent realizes the menu changed. Official Air Force language is unusually clear here, describing decision advantage as the ability to make better, faster, more accurate decisions about how military forces engage the adversary. That is not a side benefit. It is the core promise. ISR networks matter because they feed the quality and tempo of those decisions. Of course, there is still friction. Classification rules can slow sharing. Bandwidth can choke. Allies may use different systems. Services may prioritize differently. Legacy platforms do not vanish overnight. Data quality varies. Operators get overloaded. These are not trivial problems. They are the daily taxes of trying to make a giant institution think like a connected organism instead of a pile of separate departments. But the direction of travel is obvious. The joint force wants sensing and command more integrated, more resilient, more distributed, and more able to function across domains and with partners. The United States military is trying to build an architecture in which ISR is not a report that arrives after the moment, but a living input to action during the moment. That has a cultural consequence too. Analysts, operators, commanders, and technologists can no longer live on separate islands. In a true ISR network, the sensor designer must understand the operator's time problem. The analyst must understand the commander's decision problem. The commander must understand uncertainty. The technologist must understand the battlefield, not just the dashboard. Otherwise, the network turns into a beautiful machine that answers questions nobody urgent is asking. In the best case, integrated ISR shrinks the distance between collection and consequence. It helps the person gathering data understand why it matters, and the person making decisions understand where confidence comes from. That shared understanding is how a network becomes operationally alive rather than bureaucratically assembled. So if you zoom all the way out, the story of modern ISR is really the story of moving from platforms to ecosystems. From isolated eyes to connected vision, from collecting more to understanding faster, from giant vulnerable nodes to distributed survivable functions, from separate military services hoarding feeds to a joint force trying, imperfectly but deliberately, to turn information into a common weapon. The programs may differ, the acronyms may multiply, and the service cultures may argue like siblings at a holiday dinner, but the pattern is unmistakable. JADC2, the DAF Battle Network, ABMS, C5ISR, HADES, Titan, Deep Sensing, Resilient Decision Advantage. These are not random buzzwords. They are pieces of one bigger attempt to build a military that can feel the battlefield as a whole. And that brings us to the uncomfortable final truth. The side that sees better does not automatically win. Seeing is not enough. Understanding must become decision. Decision must become action. Action must survive contact with reality. But poor vision poisons every step that follows. A force that sees late sees partially, sees falsely, or cannot share what it sees, is already carrying concrete shoes into a sprint. That is why integrated ISR matters so much. It is the difference between having information and having advantage, between detecting a threat and shaping it, between noticing the storm and steering through it. In the next major conflict, the argument may not be over who owns the most sensors. It may be over whose network can still convert fragments into truth while missiles fly, links break, and deception spreads like smoke. So the next time you hear that the U.S. military is trying to see everything, do not picture one giant camera in the sky. Picture a web. Satellites, aircraft, drones, ships, soldiers, antennas, software, fusion nodes, analysts, battle managers, and commanders, all trying to transform scattered observations into a usable understanding of what matters now. Some pieces watch, some search, some interpret, some route, some decide. Together they form a warfighting nervous system built around one brutal idea. Whoever understands the battlefield first can often force the battlefield to unfold on their terms. And that is the real meaning of ISR networks explained. Not omniscience, not science fiction, not one all-seeing machine. It is a practical, layered, contested effort to connect intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance into one integrated system that helps the joint force see sooner, understand better, and act faster, even when the enemy is trying to blind it. In modern war, that may be the closest thing there is to seeing everything.